Chapter 3, Our New Mother. 2 years after the divorce, when I was 9, a mathematics teacher who had always been relatively kind to me came up while I was waiting for my turn to play ping pong. "Tonight we're all going to your house to eat sweets," she said, smiling. I didn't understand and stood there not knowing what to reply. It was true that something had been afoot these last few days. Father had asked my sisters to help him clean the apartment from top to bottom, and he had borrowed a lot of chairs and placed them along the walls of the larger room in a square. Then, the day before, he had told us that an auntie was coming, and she would take care of us from now on. What he hadn't told us was that that auntie was to be our mother. Father had brought her back with him from the bus station, a short, plump woman with a red face. She had a bag with her, and she put it down and took something out. "Come here, children," she said. "I brought you something delicious, fried sweet potato chips." She poured them into my outstretched hands, and I thought that I liked this auntie very much. Father had met her when he was out reporting on conditions in Shuangfeng County to the west of Changsha. A colleague in the local propaganda department, concerned about Father's personal problems, as finding a mate is called, introduced him to a recently divorced primary school teacher named Zhu Zhidao. They had seen each other only a few times, but the decision was made because the match seemed objectively suitable for both of them and would save them the trouble of continuing to look. This was a major attraction for my career-oriented father. That day, even Teacher Luo was kind to me, telling me not to stay to clean the classroom, but to go along home right after class. Climbing up the stairs to our apartment, I found my 2 sisters in the smaller outer room, sitting awkwardly along all the furniture. Apparently, they felt uneasy about what was happening in the inner room. I peeked inside and discovered the house had never looked so clean and beautiful. The tables in the center were covered with a red cloth and laden with packs of red-wrapped cigarettes and large bowls of peanuts and sweets. A red paper lantern covered our usually bright hanging light bulb, and a huge red double happiness pattern was pinned squarely in the center of the wall, framed on both sides by paper butterflies, birds, and lanterns. Father and Auntie were seated by the far wall, talking to 3 early guests and admiring their gift of a piece of Hunan's famous Xiang embroidery, sewn by hand and with silk thread as fine as chick's fuzz and showing a pair of peacocks, 1 male and 1 female. 4 or 5 more people arrived just behind me, bringing a porcelain tea set from Liang County. Since Father and Auntie were too busy to notice me, I went to the outer room to sit with my sisters. After a while, we heard the martial music, signaling dinner time, crackle over the loudspeaker just outside our window. Since no one invited us to do differently, we took our rice and vegetable tickets and went to the dining hall as we did on ordinary days. It was a very cold winter day, with a rare hint of snow in the air. So we lingered in the dark by coal stove in the dining hall kitchen, and went back only reluctantly after we had finished eating. All the neighbor children were crowded in front of our stairwell waiting for the end of the wedding, when all the remaining candy would be tossed in a big ring and they could scramble for it like dogs for morsels of meat. It all seemed unreal. I could hardly believe that this ritual I had taken part in so often was this time connected to my own family. Inside, a neighbor was performing a song from Chairman Mao's favorite kind of opera, Hunan's piercing and humorous Hua Gu Xi. His quivering falsetto was greeted with considerable applause and cries of, "Let's have another one." But our neighbor demurred modestly, and the spotlight shifted to one of my father's fellow reporters, who stood up and recited a Tang Dynasty poem, not in the strict rhythmical manner of our teachers, but in the ancient style, as if he were singing it. Father, sitting with our auntie at the head of the room, seemed to enjoy this very much, for he applauded loudly. Then Teacher Zeng did bird and animal imitations, and a typesetter from the newspaper sang a folk song. At this point, the fat editor, who seemed to be in charge of the proceedings, initiated a game. He hung a piece of soft candy from a chopstick by a string, and the rule was that Father and Auntie had to take a bite from the candy at the same time. Father protested, and Auntie blushed a bright red, but the crowd demanded its price with an unanimous voice, and they had to give in. I had never seen adults so wildly amused. The editor played with his victims as if he was teasing a fish with a line, always pulling it away when they were about to close on the bait. They tried and failed and tried and failed until at last they bumped noses and Auntie turned an even deeper shade of scarlet. The guests were in tears of laughter by the time their torturer relented and held the candy in one place, long enough to get a nibble at both ends. Then there was a thunderous applause and cries of "Well done! Again! Again!" But they were rescued because Senior Assistant Editor Meng and some other high leaders pushed their way into the room. They were all in formal suits with high collars, and Senior Assistant Editor Meng, who usually had a heavy beard, was freshly shaved. Under his right arm were bright red copies of the 4 volumes of Chairman Mao's selected works, and in his left hand was a set of scrolls. The guests clapped politely, and the fat editor held up both hands for silence. Senior Assistant Editor Meng cleared his throat and began to speak in a ponderous manner, typical of high-ranking cadres. Today, Comrade Liang is getting married. I represent the party organization in presenting him with the gift of the works of Chairman Mao. I hope that the new couple will study them seriously and work hard to remold their worldviews, develop the revolutionary thought, and establish a happy revolutionary family. There was general applause, while Auntie got a cup of tea and some sweets for the officials. Someone else unrolled the scrolls and hung them up. They were on red paper and black ink, 2 to face each other and 1 over the top like a doorway. The left-hand one said, 志同道合,携手前进. Your thoughts agree, your way the same, arm in arm advance together. The right-hand one said, 恩爱互助,白头偕老. Your love is tender, you aid mutual. When your hair is white, you will still be together. The top line said, 革命到底, revolution until the end. Again, the guests applauded and discussed the good calligraphy and the appositeness of the sentiment. Then, Senior Assistant Editor Meng spoke again. You, Liang and Zhu, let's have a song. According to custom, the bride and groom had to sing something with a dialogue, and they spent a long time deciding what it should be. Meanwhile, someone brought out an erhu, a 2-stringed Chinese violin, and had it tuned up and ready when my father started to sing. Liu Yang, how many bends have you turned? How many li is the water wrote to the Xiang River? Which county lies beside the river? Did it produce a man known by all the world? Zhu answered in an unsteady voice. The Liuyang River has turned 9 bends. It arrives at the Xiang River after 50 li. Xiangtan country lies beside the river. It produced our Chairman Mao, known by all the world. This was the climatic performance of the evening. When all the guests were gone, my sisters swept the peanut shells, cigarette butts, and candy wrappers into a small mountain, while Father sat by the little coal burner with his arm around our new mother. How did I sing tonight? He asked Liang Fang. He prided himself on his voice, and often sang to us in the evenings. Maybe it was just a bit hoarse, Father. I think you were a little nervous. Liang Weiping said, You should have sung the song you like. Why is the flower so red? Well, maybe I'll sing it now, he said, and as the last of the debris disappeared out the door, he sang softly to our new mother. Why is the flower so red? It's red like a burning fire, and it shows my love for you. As I fell asleep that night, Two thoughts were uppermost in my mind. One was that now we wouldn't have to eat in the dining hall anymore, and the other was that, at last, people wouldn't look down on me for having a mother who was a rightist. Before a week was out, I had discovered I was wrong on both counts. On the second day after the marriage, Father explained that Auntie had to go home now, but after a while she would come back and live with us. So we waited and waited, but she was never there except on festivals and holidays. And then, all she and Father ever talked about was the question of her transfer. Her file and residence card were located at her primary school in Shuangfeng, and getting them moved to the Hunan Daily's attached primary school would have been a long and complicated procedure. My father simply did not have the time to see it carried through. First, a report had to be written to the Changsha school to find out whether or not another teacher was needed. If there was a place, then the Shuangfen school had to be persuaded to release Auntie and send her file with all her background information and political black marks and gold stars to the Changsha school for review. If the Changsha school decided then that they wanted her, reports had to be submitted to the Shuangfeng County and Changsha City education sections, which in turn had to be approved by the district and then by the Provincial Bureau of Education. If the transfer passed all of these barriers, then the Changsha Public Security Bureau had to give permission for the removal of a residence card from Shuangfeng to Changsha. Such permission was unlikely because though it was always easy to leave a large city for a smaller one and a smaller one for the countryside, it was enormously difficult to reverse the process. There was no way around all this either, since even if my father's salary had been enough for both of them, without a city residence card, there would have been no rice coupons, and without rice coupons, Auntie could not eat. So even though Auntie wanted very much to come to the capital where so many more goods were available and life was more comfortable, in fact, I suspect that that was one of the reasons she had married Father. They gradually resigned themselves to living apart. So for us, it was as if there had been no change in our lives. The house remained lonely as ever, with Father away sometimes for months at a time. Liang returned so late that her food was usually cold, and Liang Weiping and I rattling around a place that seemed like an empty shell, with no voices and no smells of cooking and no laughter. Nor was there any relief from my life as a righteous son. I was still mocked and ill-treated on the slightest provocation. This amazed me and made me furious. Why did they still curse me when I had a new mother? I had long since stopped going to Mother's house, but she dogged my footsteps like a black shadow. I came to dread going to school and sometimes pretended to be ill and avoid it. To make things even worse, having a new mother left me open to a new kind of teasing. The neighbors used to ask me, "What do you call her? She's not your real mother and she's not your real auntie." They seemed to find this hilarious, and I grew so sensitive to the issue that I never brought her name up in conversation except with my own sisters. Fortunately, at around this time, I was transferred to the 3-mile primary school because the Hunan Daily's attached primary school had only 4 grades. There, things were better for me, since my new teacher's husband was himself a rightist and her own son had been victimized like me. Furthermore, she had great praise for my paintings and compositions, and she understood how it felt to be the only student who was not a young pioneer. So she asked the other students to train me in preparation for joining. I did not feel confident, though, and I was eager to forestall trouble before they found out too much about me. So all by myself, before it became a national phenomenon, I figured out a way of going through the back door, or buying influence. I told the student officers that my father would soon be giving me a lot of money, which I would use to buy them a soccer ball. On the strength of this, they allowed me to become a young pioneer. And within 2 weeks, I was initiated. Months passed and no soccer ball appeared, but they could do nothing. I wore my triangular red scarf defiantly everywhere. My grades at the new school were much better than they had been, because I had received superior training at the attached primary school, and because my situation was happier. I was soon asked to edit the school's blackboard newspaper, and I began to reread the stories father had once read aloud to me, searching for materials. I became so voracious a reader that the new fen father gave me as pocket money were not nearly enough to sustain my habit. I couldn't afford to buy books, of course, but there were outdoor libraries where, for a small sum, you had the right to sit on a curb and read a book. Unfortunately, one fen got only 2 books, which were hardly enough. I decided to go on working, pushing carts. At about 2 li from the Hunan Daily compound was the Changsha North Railroad Station for freight trains. Nearly all of the cargo was distributed to stores and units by carts pulled by men, and every day more than 1,000 of these carts left the station to draw a web over the whole city. The pullers were salaried workers, but they often needed a pusher behind them, especially up the steep hill just beyond the station, and it was there that I hoped to pick up my book money. The station was probably the filthiest place in the city, with mud, bricks, soot, and garbage everywhere. It was a haven for anyone out of work and hoping to pick up a penny. There were plenty of beggars, gamblers, crazy people, and other bad types, and also a lot of children, dirty and snot-nosed and in rags, speaking nothing but the filthy Changsha street language. These children clustered outside the high bamboo fence around the cargo area, waiting for a puller to come out so they could descend upon him, begging for 10 minutes of work. The standard rate for pushing a cart up a hill was 2 fen, 2 Chinese cents, but I discovered a clever way to make quicker money. Whenever a puller came out, I shouted that I was willing to push for only 1 fen. In this way, I rapidly took a lot of business for myself, and after only a few hours had nearly a whole jiao, 10 Chinese cents, as I walked home at twilight. I was enormously pleased with myself. I had enough money to read almost 20 books, and I wore my aching back and legs and shoulders like badges of merit to take home to show my father. I decided that this was so profitable that I would go every day after school, and I would soon save up enough money to actually buy some books instead of forever reading on street corners. The next day, I couldn't walk without pain, but I forced my body back to the railroad station. However, no sooner had I arrived than I was encircled by a group of the street urchins I had priced out the day before. The biggest one seemed to be their leader, and he spoke to me roughly. "Where are you from, wild dog? You think you can steal our rice bowls?" I did not know what to say, and just mumbled something. Then the big one shoved me, and someone else pushed me back again, and I was really afraid. "If you want money, I can give it to you. Just don't hit me," I begged. And to prove my words, I emptied my pockets for their 7 or 8 fen. But they did not take my money. They just wanted to frighten me. Still, it was absolutely clear that if I tried to compete again, they would beat me up. With that, my career as a cart pusher came to a precipitous end, and I had to turn to collecting empty toothpaste tubes for the recycling station to make my book money. My new school was nearer to Liang Feng's number 1 middle school than my old one had been. This pleased me. I had always admired her more than Liang Weiping because she was brilliantly intelligent, whereas Liang Weiping was only average in school and seemed most competent in the house. Liang Feng's friends discussed important things. Liang Weiping's friends liked to gossip and idle their time away. So I would go and wait for Liang Feng at school like a faithful little dog, hoping to be included in some interesting conversation, or to be allowed to tag along to some new places. However, my sister was at the age where boys and girls does not like being together, and the little brother's attention was a great burden and embarrassment to her. Furthermore, she was doing everything possible to join the Communist Youth League, the only route to glory a good job and public respect, and she was sensitive about any public contact with her rightist family. She would make me wait outside the gate of the school, and then I had to follow behind her at a safe distance. I was too young to understand her sentiment and went to meet her anyway, waiting patiently to be thrown scraps of love. In this way, I came to understand, more than Liang Weiping or my father, her suffering at not being allowed to join the league. She truly turned herself inside out to meet the requirements, and that could answer father's angry questions only with the unhappy excuse that the number 1 middle school had too many progressive students and the competition was too fierce. I knew she kept her grades above 90 and often stayed after school because she had volunteered for some unpleasant task. She even went every Sunday with other students from bad backgrounds or who sought to be progressive to help workers collect feces from the outhouses and bring it to the docks to be shipped out to the countryside. I once followed her on her rounds but was unable to control my nausea when I saw her wielding her huge ladle, scooping out wet masses of stench and white worms and pouring them into her cart, and she always came home depressed or weeping, all her efforts to no avail. One day, when she was out, I was leafing through the notebook and discovered page after page of thought reports to the Communist Youth League. She wrote about how she was collecting excrement in order to struggle against her capitalist vanity and capitalist fear of filth, hoping to cultivate a true proletarian humility and understanding of the glory of labor. Remembering, when she felt she would vomit, the great proletarian hero Lei Feng and his sacrifices to the people. She confessed her weakness in going to see her capitalist mother and her determination to overcome such tendencies, saying she hated herself for their past contact. She even said she wanted to renounce all family ties and let the party be her true father and mother, because only then could she become a true revolutionary and work for the glory of socialism. I felt sad when I read these things. I could understand why she hated our mother, since sometimes I felt that way too, but I wondered whether she hadn't gone so far. How could the party be her parents? No matter what I felt during that day, I still dreamed at night of our lives when we were all together before the divorce. Could anything change that? I was afraid that I too might be led to cut off the last of my feelings to try to achieve an impossible goal. Soon, I too would be of age to join the league. My teachers and father had always taught me about the importance of the young pioneers, the Communist Youth League, and the party. I had joined the first one only through guile, and that only after most of my classmates. And I knew about Liang Fang, how month after month and year after year she had been turned down by the league at the number 1 middle school. I resolved that I would never go through the same thing she had. There must be an easier way. Liang Weiping, at the number 13 middle school across the street from the newspaper, only had to go wash public buses on Sundays. So when I finally finished primary school, my chances for getting ahead were a major consideration in my selection of a middle school. According to the system in effect at that time, we were all to have an opportunity to go, but the assignment to the particular school was to be on the basis of our grades and our own requests. Although my grades were good enough to qualify me for the number 1 middle school, I wanted one where there would be less political competition. The number 13 middle school met this criterion, and it was also so near the Xiang River that I could be able to go swimming after school. So I completed the request forms and went cheerfully home to wait for the notification. But in fact, it would be years before I would see the inside of another classroom. The difficulty